Good afternoon. Thank you for making it out on a rainy day. My name is Bruce Jones. I'm the Vice President and the Director for the Foreign Policy Program here at Brookings. And on behalf of myself and Ted Batkin from our International Order and Strategy Project, really the leader of our work on international human rights, it's my pleasure to welcome you today to today's Alan and Jane Batkin's International Leaders Forum with Zeid Hussein, the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights. I'd like to extend a special welcome to the representatives of the Diplomatic Corps who are here today and to the members of our Foreign Policy Leadership Council who are also joining us. We're very grateful for you being here, and we're grateful to Alan and Jan Batkin for their support of this forum, which allows us to create a platform for critical leaders on the world stage to talk to us about how they see the challenges in front of us, and no surprise, there are lots of them. I think it's a particular privilege to be able to welcome an individual who's leading on matters of international consequence from his position at the UN, and also an old and longtime friend of Brookings and of myself. Zeid assumed the role of UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in September 2014 after a long career dedicated to the promotion of human rights and the international rule of law, a career that stems back to his time as a political affairs officer in the UN peacekeeping mission UNPROFOR, 1994 to 1996. He then twice served as Jordan's ambassador to the UN, and in that capacity played critical roles in advancing a rights-oriented multilateralism. It was no surprise that Kofi Annan turned to him specifically to help tackle, in the first effort to do this, to tackle the challenge of sexual exploitation from peacekeepers. He was an ardent advocate and a central player in the establishment of the International Criminal Court, has been continuously involved in the International Court of Justice. And, of course, he has a second career and a second life as a Jordanian diplomat to the United States, in which he played a really important role at a crucial time in strengthening U.S.-Jordanian relations, I think in a very critical way in 2007 to 2010. Currently, as UN High Commissioner, Zeid has been an advocate for voices that we would otherwise miss. And in my mind, he exhibits that rarest of leadership qualities, moral courage. That's evident when he's speaking out against the barbaric vision of ISIS, when he's speaking out about human rights abuses in the region from which he comes, when he's speaking out or speaking for those caught by the capricious hand of authoritarian regimes. It's evident when he speaks up against human rights abuses by the major powers. It's evident when he criticizes the United States, when we fail to live up to our own standards and our own vision. And I welcome Zeid's courage and consistency in doing that. I think we're at a time in both American and international politics when moral courage from our leaders is in short supply. So it's extremely important to pay attention to those who exhibit it, and a particular pleasure to welcome Zeid today. I think his efforts on the human rights stage and at the UN remind us that human dignity is not restricted by race or creed or gender or ethnicity. It is a universal value, but it takes universal commitment to defend. And so I want to both welcome Zeid to the stage, but also express my appreciation to him as a citizen of this country and of the world for the work that you do on our behalf at the UN. So, Zeid, thank you for coming back to Brookings.
Thank you, Bruce, for that warm welcome. You referred to me as Zeid and Zeid Hussein, and it reminds me how in the UN now I am referred to in different combinations of names. So I'm Zeid al-Hussein, sometimes I'm Zeid al-Hussein, sometimes I'm just Zeid Raad, sometimes I'm Zeid, and then Raad al-Hussein is one name. So confusing is this that the other day I was in Brussels, and a journalist came up to me, a Danish journalist, and she tugged on my shoulder, and she said to me, "Who are you?" And I said, "You know, I really haven't the foggiest idea." Bruce, thank you for this invitation to speak at Brookings, an institution I've always long admired. It has been 100 years since you began developing policy ideas to address national and global challenges. Today, the world and this country are caught up in a very tense and difficult period of history. The generation that lived through the horror of the Second World War, which, in its aftermath, built a framework of laws and institutions to keep the peace, is leaving the scene. We are witnessing policies and posturing that hark back to an earlier period, a period of unprincipled land grabs and the shelling and strafing of defenseless cities, a period of brutal nationalist bullies scapegoating the vulnerable, a period marked by the strutting, boastful sneering of the demagogue, prepared to whip up violence if it will further his agenda. Tolstoy tells us in War and Peace that it is a mistake to look back at history as only a series of clear decisions and sharply defined turning points. It is often rather a blur of shifting events in which half-aware actors never fully grasp that they are making choices at all. Only with hindsight can we see with clarity that at some specific moment we teetered on the cusp of tragedy, not yet hurtling towards it, still able to pull back, and yet blindly swept on, caught up in the lethal churn of events. My point today is to query whether in the first or in a few years' time we will not be identifying the year 2016 as such a moment. The task of learning to live together in equality and justice is humanity's oldest and most essential challenge. It is very literally the difference between life and death, between conflict and peace, between destruction and prosperity, between suffering and safety, pain and joy. And as the world lurches from one crisis to another, I suggest we take a closer look at this process, because when we achieve it, and this is a task that can and frequently is achieved, we do so with very practical steps. So how is security constructed? How do we build piece by piece the architecture of well-being and coexistence? We need to begin by building trust, rule of law institutions which offer the confidence of impartial justice, equality. Every individual must be clear in the knowledge that regardless of sex, race, ethnicity, opinions, belief, caste, age, or sexual orientation, her quality rights or her equal rights are fully acknowledged. Trust can only build up if government is transparent and accountable. And people must feel certain that they are entitled to contribute to all decisions in which they have a stake. We must ensure fundamental economic and social rights, such as the right to clean water, to education, to adequate health care. The freedoms of expression, association, and belief must prevail, together with strong and independent media, in order that people be fully informed and free to contribute ideas and experiences without fear of attack. Step by step, these elements of justice, participation, conflict resolution, and power sharing build into a deep and broad process of confidence, mutual respect, and minimal resolvable grievances. It is a process that embraces diversity and nourishes the resilient bonds of human dignity. It is deeply principled because the value of human life is the same for all of us, and all of us deserve to live in such a way. And it is also the most effective way of governing, because human rights are not sappy notions but sound policy choices which build strong, economically healthy countries and societies where there is peace. Nations thrive when they build institutions that empower their people and enable them to develop their potential in freedom. That broad inclusion immunizes against violent conflict and extremism. But if we fail to maintain this architecture, allowing it to crumble or to be picked apart piece by profiteers, then we face nightmares. Places where an iron fist crushes all criticism, where arbitrary violence and discrimination stands in place of law, where hate bubbles up and is crushed into hiding, so that it festers and metastasizes into appalling, inhuman shapes, where a regime kidnaps, tortures, and murders children who scrawl slogans on the wall of their school, then fires on their parents and relatives protesting their abduction, and goes on to shell and bomb millions of its own people, their fields of mulberry trees, and the intricate mosaic of their neighborhoods into a blasted landscape of alienation and hate. Conflict, discrimination, and poverty, inequality and terrorism are mutually reinforcing man-made disasters that are hammering too many communities and individuals. They are constructed. They are contagious. This is true for all parts of the world, but we see a striking example in the Middle East. Spreading out from the destruction of Iraq and the tyranny of Syria, much of the region is now engulfed in violence. And this ferocity is further spreading with severe extremist threats in almost every state. Widening outwards to Somalia, Nigeria, and Mali, we also see horrific abuse of human rights by terrorist groups that feed on the grievances of the people. Further repressing human rights is not a solution to these conflicts, it is a contributing cause. The work of undoing this construction of conflict and building in its place the processes which lead to human dignity, safety, and peace is the most urgent preoccupation of my office. We exist to assist states to uphold the human rights norms that safeguard human dignity and which states themselves laid down. Our aim is to build up both their will and their capacity to protect human rights and to ensure accountability for any violations or abuses in order to prevent further violations. The unique value of our work and the work of our office rests on a dual role. We monitor to identify and analyze problems and assist to help those problems change. Through reporting, in-depth assessment, and investigations, our field officers identify and prioritize the gaps in law and institutions that cause wrongful suffering to individuals, whether torture, land grabs, the oppression of women, or discrimination against people because of ethnicity or caste. Then, based on that fact-finding work, we try to assist states to change those factors. We train prison guards and police to question people without torture. We help judges apply the principles of fairness and rights that are upheld by binding international law, and to maintain fair trials and due process guarantees. We strengthen grassroots actors and amplify their voices, including minority and indigenous groups. We help to train military forces, especially when it becomes their duty to protect civilians. We build programs for human rights education. We develop technical cooperation programs, guidelines, and other tools that assist government officials and civil society to build legitimate and accountable democratic institutions and a diverse ecosystem of strong civil society actors and independent media. In particular, policing and security forces must embody the rule of law or fail. It is they who are often seen as the face of the state. When security forces act with contempt for people's rights, treating them as enemies, then enemies are what they become. Every act of torture contributes to extremism. Every arbitrary arrest and abusive crackdown, every act that represses civil society and legitimate dissent is a step towards further violence. And this is the story of hundreds of quiet successes. This is the story of hundreds of quiet successes, some of them small, but all of them significant. Peace, development, and human rights are built around each other, and this work, which builds piece by piece that triple architecture, is deeply appreciated. My office cannot respond to the many requests for our assistance because of our minuscule resources. It is a continuing source of surprise and dismay for me to note the extraordinarily tiny budgets that we must rely on. And your help in changing this situation would be a meaningful step for the many people who count on our work. We can set our planet on a course of greater inclusion, more sustained prosperity, more justice, more dignity, more freedom, more peace. We can build in human rights. We can encourage leaders to embrace the voices of their people instead of cutting themselves off from their most precious resource. We can help them replace institutions that have been constructed to enable a political elite to monopolize power, to extract economic resources, and to act in detriment of the common good, because such institutions inevitably generate instability. Groups will struggle to seize that power, and the elites will live in fear of their own people. That fear will breed obsessive surveillance systems and mistrust, hampering every kind of progress, including economic growth, and driving discrimination. Respect for human rights offers states a path towards greater stability and not less. Dialogue and respect for human rights, including the rights of minorities, build confidence and loyalty, as well as thriving political and economic institutions. Conflict can be prevented. Peace, security, and development can be built brick by brick. Equality, dignity, participation, respect. Human rights are the DNA that links peace and development work together. They are not expensive, they are priceless. They are not luxuries for times of peace. They are the workhorses, the load-bearing bricks and mortar that build peace. Human rights prime the virtuous cycle of increasing freedom, increasing resilience, and greater security throughout the international system. That is the essence of the mandate of the UN and of my office, from preventing torture to fighting discrimination and upholding the rights to education, housing, and much more. It is the work that we do. And our task today, your task at Brookings, as you enter your second century, becomes the need to strengthen the clarity and moral courage of our political leaders in supporting this work. There is absolutely no time to lose. And I thank you very much for your attention.